Hello friends, and welcome to Jocelyn's Twilight Years, how to be a really old model. I'm in Holland this month, in a terrible Airbnb. At the moment there's no heating, although it's going to be fixed. The kettle doesn't work, so making a cup of tea is taking about half an hour. The coffee machine doesn't work, which personally I don't care about very much because I don't drink coffee. But and the blinds don't work, so when I get naked, everyone can see. Awesome, let me show you. Yes, very remarkable. Anyway, this month I would like to talk to you about a topic which becomes relevant to me often during my working life and has happened several times recently. And it's about touching models. Now, by touching models, I do not mean sexually assaulting models. Like, clearly we all know that's not okay, and if you don't know that's okay, don't work with models. Just go and sort your life out until you understand that it's not okay. I'm talking about a slightly different kind of touching models, and I want to explain from a model's point of view why it's a problem. So I should say to begin with, this stuff only partially applies for bondage and spanking shoots, because obviously at a bondage shoot, someone's going to have to touch me because they're tying me up, and at a spanking shoot, similarly, someone's obviously going to be touching me. So I'm not talking about the top or the dom, my co-performer, obviously, they are going to be touching me. That doesn't mean that they should touch me when we are not rolling cameras, which is probably a different issue, and it doesn't mean that they should touch me more than is necessary or in a different way from what we have agreed to. So at spanking shoots, for example, you can occasionally get people playing the top, doing the spanking, who start trying to stroke your bottom when we're not shooting or caress your hair, and really that's the sort of thing that needs to be negotiated, because just because someone's okay being spanked, it doesn't mean they're necessarily okay with having their head stroked or whatever. Generally speaking, this is not an issue though, so I just wanted to do a little quick disclaimer to say that I'm not talking about my co-performers. It's a kind of different issue that's more complicated and is all about your dynamics. So I'm talking about when one of you is the photographer, one of you is the model. I think there are three types of touching that tend to happen most often at shoots, so I want to address them all. The first one is the obvious pervy photographer pushing his luck with touching. That sort of photographer will tend to do things like, say you've got a lovely bottom and suddenly touch your bottom. They will say things like, oh, do you want some help putting on your stockings? Oh, can I help you moisturize your back? That sort of thing. And I think, although it's awful, thank goodness it's also relatively rare, because most decent, reasonable human beings understand that that is in no way acceptable. And actually that kind of behaviour, when your model is nude or semi-nude, is even more unacceptable than in some other situations. There are the occasional pervy photographers who think that models won't notice this, but believe me, we have got a radar for that kind of thing, because we have to, and because sadly most of us will have experience of photographers who try to push their luck like this. As a result, we will often be quite sensitive to this sort of thing, and if you try it, you're very likely to get us telling you then and there that things are not okay. And even if we don't do that, the chances of us leaving you a negative reference become very high. So hopefully we've cleared that one up. Don't pervily touch your model. Don't try to adjust her clothes in a pervy way so you can try to touch her breasts. Just don't do that. The other two categories are slightly more complicated, and I think that the photographers who tend to be guilty of this behaviour fall into two categories, so I'm going to talk about that now. One of them is it's the situation, which happens to me quite a lot because I shoot fetish stuff, is that if I'm shooting with a photographer who has a fetish for a particular thing, so sweaters, silk scarves, some sort of item that I might be wearing, and these photographers often, until I'm in those clothes, their boundaries are great, they don't touch me. When I'm in those clothes, however, I think it would be easy to dismiss them as pervily trying to grope me, but I suspect something else is going on, so I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think that once I am in the item that matters to them a lot, sometimes they forget that there's still an actual person inside, because what they're looking at and what they're focused on is the item, which is of importance to them. And so in these situations, photographers can often just completely forget about personal space, forget about asking you if they're going to adjust clothing, and they will just tend to kind of lunge in on you to adjust things to their satisfaction. That's because the item that I'm wearing is very important to them. And I think that sometimes they just forget that underneath the sweater or the silk scarf or whatever is the same person who was with them 5 minutes ago who wasn't being randomly touched. So I think that it's worth remembering, if you're a photographer who is dealing with fetish items, that the model belongs to herself when she's wearing your latex or your PVC or your sweaters or your silk scarves. She belongs to herself just as much as she did before she put those items on, and she doesn't belong to you any more than she did before she put those items on. So the normal rules of social interaction and personal space still apply. And I think it's just a failure of imagination, because obviously in the society we live in, women get a lot more unwelcome touching, unwelcome attention than men do. And because most of the photographers who book me are men, I imagine that a lot of them have never actually experienced this breaking of the personal space rule. So I guess a lot of them just have no idea how it feels. And how it feels in this situation is not like being sexually assaulted, for me at least. It feels like being dehumanized. It feels as though they've forgotten that I'm still here with my feelings and my personal space requirements. And it can be a curiously degrading feeling, really. Not because I feel like they're sexually assaulting me, but just because I feel like they've forgotten that I'm there. The third category, and I have an amazing example of this, is the type of photographer who isn't good at verbally expressing themselves. So rather than telling you, please can you put your hand up to your face, they will try to grab your hand and put it up to your face. Now, this is annoying because it again breaks into your personal space. It's also an incredibly slow way of directing a model. If you're the photographer holding your camera and you have to put your camera down or round your neck, come into the set and adjust the model's arm, it's slow and it's inefficient. And by the time you've got back to your place for taking the picture, the poor model has been in an artificial position for longer than she would have been if you just let her pose, and the whole thing is going to look more artificial. But that's not my main issue with it. My main issue with it is that when you choose not to verbalise your expectation or your direction, when you choose not to explain verbally what you want the model to do, you imply that we can't understand, basically. I feel as though when people do this, when people physically direct me instead of verbally direct me, I feel as though they are underestimating my ability to translate what they're saying. And that is a curiously horrible feeling. The worst example I ever had of this, and there were extenuating circumstances, was when I was working with a photographer who didn't shoot models very much. His style of photography was pet photography, so he did pet portraits. Obviously, with an animal, you probably do have to physically move them around. And when I eventually said, after about 20 minutes of the shoot with him manhandling me, I said, you can't do that, you need to express yourself verbally. He, to his credit, apologised and said, I'm really sorry, that I think it's because I'm just used to dealing with animals who can't understand direction. And I see his point, but the implied lack of faith in your model's intelligence when you don't bother to tell her, move your hand up from your hip to your face, it's considerably irritating because it is considerably humiliating to have someone assume that you're not going to be able to understand that. Now, obviously, that's probably not what's going on. It's also possibly the photographer's inability to express themselves verbally. But if you are a photographer of people, I'm afraid that's one of the things you have to work on. Just as I, as a model, have to work on interpreting direction properly, you have to work on giving direction properly, because it's not acceptable to come in and start posing a model as though she's not a sentient being. Sorry, that is strict, but it's true, and I thought I would try to explain it. I think when I tell photographers not to touch me during shoots, which I occasionally do have to say, I think they jump to the conclusion that I'm accusing them of trying to grope me. And in fact, that's not the case. Although sometimes it probably is the case, I am more than aware there are other reasons for it. It's just that I don't think those reasons are acceptable. So I'm sorry that was a strict message, but I do want to give value through my channel for actual technical knowledge about how to conduct photo shoots. And I would like to say that you will find that if you appreciate models' boundaries, appreciate their personal space, the relationship you'll build with that model is going to be so much better. And probably under those circumstances, when you have a good relationship with them, if they are struggling to find a pose, they're very likely to say to you, like, come and help me, like, show me what you mean. So by appreciating their personal space, you will eventually possibly be able to go into their personal space, but don't try to do that cynically. No, we will notice. So thank you for joining me. Next month, I have too many ideas, basically. I probably need to do one video a week for a while to get through my ideas, but I can't because I'm still writing my book, which, FYI, the first draft is done. It is with my sister, who is reading it through, and with my husband, who's also reading it through, and I am working on a synopsis and query letters to try to get an agent. Just thought I'd let you know. So now I'm going to go to my shoot somewhere north of Amsterdam, and I'm going to come back here and shoot some damsel in distress bondage. Hopefully the heat will be fixed by then. And I will see you next month. Thank you as always for joining me. Please leave comments if you like. Don't let them be stupid, because if so, I may well reply and I may well be quite rude. Bye-bye. Bye.